either by Silent Hill or many other games. And, you know, there are certain interesting ways that Silent Hill gets kind of more. Clock Tower was mentioned for one of them. But I really felt like Silent Hill was the apex of that particular format in time. And I think Heavy Rain, it's no secret, like something like Heavy Rain, and there are several, Alan Wake, those kinds of games really borrow very heavily from Silent Hill. No big secret there. DTX 180 mentioned the idea of Gran Turismo. Fantastic contribution. Think that is absolutely pivotal. Now, you might be able to weigh in terms of importance 1 and 2, but I would probably stick with the first one. I remember the first time I played Gran Turismo, and I just could not believe how incredibly cool that game was. It held up so well, and it changed. It really has. If you look at the graphics, although I know they were not stellar, when you went into replay mode, it was as if you were watching a race on TV. And that was the very first time I really felt like every single move I was doing was being recorded in such a way that they could even take the camera, change it, show me every single thing I was doing. I could look at every single turn. You know, I lost some time here. I clearly hit the brakes too quickly. And you could really get deep down into driving. And I know for a while, the United States Sports Car Association actually was using Gran Turismo as the training apparatus for some of their driving courses before they actually got people into cars. That says a lot. Now, here's why I think Gran Turismo is so damn important. Every single game, racing game, driving game that comes after it is directly affected by Gran Turismo. Now, it's not to say that the arcade-esque kind of games, the test drives, the Cruis'n USAs, you know, what's the other one I'm thinking of? Gosh, my mind is a complete blank. The one where you boost and you have to burn out. All the arcade, sorry guys, the arcade experience of those kinds of games is maintained. No question, those games remain very popular. However, Gran Turismo completely changed the entire genre because people had to think about things like realism, of what they would want their car to function like. Now, I understand that Test Drive 4 and Burnout is horribly unrealistic, but they have to make certain kinds of, they have to tip their hat in some ways to Gran Turismo 4 to make these things a little more realistic, a little more believable, a little more responsive the way that they probably would be in the real world, and to a certain degree they have to be customizable in a way where people could really ratchet up their personal quotient into the game. This is me. I've done this is my car, I've built it, and now I'm going to show you what it can do. And I just feel like Gran Turismo did all of that stuff tremendously well. And the perfection of that form comes much later, but Gran Turismo 1 opens that door wide and does a tremendous job with it, so I agree 100%. And now I'll go on to a few others. Temu John mentioned Tomb Raider. Some of you are going to laugh at that because you played Tomb Raider and it wasn't the greatest experience. The graphics were very choppy. It was difficult to put up with, very difficult to control, even more difficult than Resident Evil 4 was in many, many ways. They improved upon that in later generations. But here is why Tomb Raider, or Lara Croft Tomb Raider, is so damn important, and I just said it, Lara Croft. Lara Croft fundamentally changes, for better or for worse, the landscape of video gaming. At that particular point in time, Lara Croft becomes the focus point of every single attack on how video games are looked at from a gender perspective. In other words, you can't have women in a video game unless they look like Lara Croft. And I think that's a stigma that sticks with games to this day. And keep in mind, guys, that when Toby Gard invented the idea of Tomb Raider was supposed to be an Indiana Jones kind of epic, a la Uncharted, the way that is now. But that got changed because, quite honestly, the sex appeal factor was too great with having someone that was a British woman who was very attractive, you know, Angelina Jolie-esque, and I'm not just saying that because Angelina Jolie played her in the movies, but because this woman is very, very beautiful, wearing very, very little, running around with a lot of guns and blowing things up. It completely defines what women are supposed to look like. Again, for better, for worse, and I would argue for the worse, for generations to come, something that is still in video games today. If people before Lara Croft didn't think that video gaming was made up of a bunch of nerds that can't get laid and just love to look at, you know, pictures of, or not pictures, but 3D models of really crappily drawn, semi-nude women. Lara Croft confirmed that for all of us. And I don't want to be too negative about it because the game actually was really a great experience, as I recall, and was not overpoweringly about the sex involved with Lara Croft. But it is impossible to ignore the contribution of Lara Croft into the zeitgeist of video gaming that still exists today, and that is why I would say it's important. Great mention. Now, let's see what else. Astolia mentioned Twisted Metal as the candidate. Now, here's something I want to say about Twisted Metal. Fantastic game, of course, 2 being the best from my perspective of all time. Twisted Metal, I would say, is important again for its influence and not because of the game itself. I'm going to back Astolia up on this one. GTA is absolutely, in the way that we know GTA today, not in the ways that we know GTA back then, which at that point was very much kind of a top-down driving simulator. And any of you that played them, you are well acquainted with it, right? GTA is so influenced by Twisted Metal, by the frenetic pace, by the near misses, by the high-flying action. The direct result of Twisted Metal is Tommy Vercetti flying off a ramp in the middle of Vice City. It's just the direct lineage, guys, and I think that can't be ignored. GTA is such a tremendous force. I might argue is one of the most important games of the next generation, or specifically the PlayStation 2. But that being said, Twisted Metal gives birth to that concept. And even though GTA is not a car combat simulator, it really does take from that format. And I think Twisted Metal really influences game developers. If you go and talk to game developers, I would say of almost every color, they will mention Twisted Metal as one of those games that influenced them. And that, to me, again, really demonstrates importance. Okay, hey guys, sorry about that. I just realized that I actually forgot to charge the official Clan of the Grey Wolf flip video camera after I shot the last Wringer on vacation, so hence it died mid-recording, and it's about an hour and a half later after I started the Wringer, but it's okay because I'm still watching football and can leave off, or will try to leave off, or try to pick it up right where we left off last time in the video cut out. So, I just finished talking about some of the contributions I thought were great. One of the things I wanted to highlight, though, is before we leave the whole conversation behind, is to talk about some of the games that got mentioned that I thought were really, really good, but not necessarily up for the most important game on the PlayStation era. And I think that warrants mention today, and so I wanted to do that. First and foremost was Xenogears. I thought that Xenogears was really a testament to being the first of a new generation of games, instead of being the last of a previous generation of games. And Wild Arms, to me, was kind of the last of a 16-bit, of kind of an NES era game, whereas Xenogears, I think, is at the very cusp of the new breed of what an RPG looks like, in the 3D world. And so I think Xenogears is a great, great game. Is it the most important? Definitely not. But it's up there as one of the games that I think deserves appreciation, and absolutely does. If you talk to someone, again, I use this a lot, but if you ask someone in development, they'll tell you that Xenogears is absolutely well thought of, tremendously. And Xenogears was mentioned by Conthusiast, and wanted to point that out as well, and was picked up by several of you as well. And as I say, I think it's completely worthy of mention. Next, I wanted to say, Nomog actually mentioned the legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. And while I think it would be difficult to argue that this is the most important game of the PS1, I think it's very easy to say that it's one of the most enjoyable experiences, and I think it does a lot of really cool work. I remember playing Soul Reaver, for hours and hours on end. I thought it did a great job of combining the action and of the traditional platformers with some of the more beat 'em up kind of elements. It does third person exceedingly well. It had the dynamic of having the vision system, which could kind of change every single environment that you were in. And I thought Legacy of Kain did a great job of really bringing a very in-depth and deep story to a character that has a lot of life being kind of lifeless, a la Grand Theft Auto, at least up until, say, even through Tommy Vercetti and onto CJ in later iterations of Grand Theft Auto, but very similar kind of vein with Legacy of Kain. Does a great job of bringing a character to life, but the character kind of just becomes an extension of you because you are the voice and you are the legs and arms of the character. And I thought that was really a great job. So Legacy of Kain definitely merits mention, even though I don't think it's one of the most important games. It's definitely one of the better games of the PS1. And I'm sure we'll talk about that and many other things soon. And for those of you chomping at the bit to talk about games that were most important from the particular era of the PS1, I think it's safe to say we could see that coming through the Weekly Wringer very, very soon. Hint, hint. Now, on to my own thoughts about the most important game of the PS1. Now, guys, obviously, I am not going to sit here and try and reinvent the wheel. You know it, I know it. Almost everything we've talked about here today, I think, are the games that have to be mentioned. And I'm not going to deviate from that. I'm not going to go out and try to pick something out of left field just to say it. And I'm certainly not going to try to throw a new spin at you from any one of these particular ones. But if I'm giving my clear, honest opinion, I have to say that I believe Final Fantasy VII is actually the most important game of the PlayStation 1 console. And the reason why, again, it's not very far from what we've said already. It is the prototype of so many games that follow after it. And it's like The Matrix, guys. You might not like The Matrix as being a fundamentally fantastic movie that you love and enjoy so much. But The Matrix fundamentally changed the movies, right? There were films that came before The Matrix and films that came after The Matrix. Same thing with Jurassic Park. And I think Final Fantasy VII, even if you're not making an RPG, someone that's playing video games has to be at least aware of Final Fantasy VII and the contributions that it's made to video games. Or else, your game is probably going to stagnate. It's not going to be something that's going to be fresh. It has the kind of concepts of new ideas of game making. And I think Final Fantasy VII is a watershed moment. It really does change the face of video gaming. As I said, it's the reason that I actually owned a PS1, at least initially. And although I so wanted to follow in its footsteps with things like Final Fantasy VIII and so on and so forth, they never really lived up to the magic and luster of Final Fantasy VII for me. I know many of you spoke about Final Fantasy IX, which was the back-to-basics attempt of the Final Fantasy series, something that they have not tried since, although I do believe they probably should. RPGs have, for better or for worse, been moved into two different, I guess, modes of thought. All right, let's just say that. One is that an RPG has to be still in the niche. It has to be something that most people don't probably play. Very small group of people actually play RPGs, or it's in the MMORPG vector or line of thought, where you have, obviously we all know what MMORPGs are, but those are kind of the only two ways that an RPG really comes to be nowadays, unfortunately. And Final Fantasy VII is the kind of archetype of what we now think of as a JRPG and how we think of RPGs today. It's been completely and totally shaped by that game. I think that's undoubtable. So that's going to get my vote. Really probably followed with a close second, I would say either with Castlevania or Metal Gear Solid. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is one of those games that is infinitely replayable. Metal Gear Solid is almost difficult to play nowadays because of the graphics. It's another one that I think could easily be rebooted, a la the 10th anniversary Halo edition that's coming out this year. I think that could easily be redone, and I'm sure that Metal Gear Solid, it kind of redone, would be tremendously fun to play. It's in a similar vein to GoldenEye. Okay, that puts the PS1 question to bed. I think there was so many great conversations that arose from that, and I really, really like that. And that's